Hello class and welcome to the Comp 101 recording for the final exam review. Just a reminder that you want to contact your proctor 2 to 3 days prior to when you plan on taking your exam in order to ensure that your proctor will be available and open on the date and time that you want to take the exam. You also need to make sure that you allow enough time for completion of your exam because once you start the exam, you must finish it. And so if you arrive and there's only a half an hour left before your proctor closes, you're only going to have a half an hour to complete your exam, even though technically there's 2 to 3 hours for the exam. If you only give yourself 20 minutes till closing, that's all you've got. All right, so you want to make sure that your proctor is available on the date and time and that you have sufficient time to complete your exam when you arrive. All right. As far as the exam goes, it's going to follow the same format that you encountered on the first two exams. It's going to have a portion allocated to short answer, a portion allocated to essay, and a portion allocated to problems and programming. But for the final exam, definitely the focus will be more on providing pseudocode examples and JavaScript examples, so much more heavily associated with coding snippets and coding examples for both the essay and the programs and problem solving. Now, this is a missed print up here. There is only 100 points on the final exam, and so these are divided up 30, 30, and 40, not as indicated here. This exam review is available on the course website under the final exam icon, so you can download this exam review and use it as a tool to assist you as you're preparing for the exam. And also, just as a side note, preparation for the exam, a great way to prepare for the exam is to pull out all of your homeworks for the entire course and to review all the homeworks. And you can also take a look at the PowerPoints, which are available on all the Meet sessions, and download those PowerPoints and review those as well. The final exam is comprehensive, although it will focus most heavily on the materials offered during weeks 6 through, during the final 5 weeks of the course, 11 through 15. It will focus most heavily there, but all material in the exam is fair game for the exam, and it will definitely go back and address key components. All right. Okay, so as far as the exam review itself goes, the binary numbering system back from the first couple weeks, you're going to want to make sure that you are able to define what the binary numbering system is, that you can correctly describe what a bit is, what a byte is, and that you're able to convert numbers from binary into decimal and likewise from decimal into binary. The mathematical order of precedence, you also want to make sure that you're familiar with that. And actually, if you're going to continue with programming or with computers in any way, shape, or form, you will want to just maintain the mathematical order of precedence because you will encounter that throughout your career. So however it is that you can remember that using whatever acronym or memory tool that you use, PEMDAS, My Dear Aunt Sally, you just want to make sure that you know and understand that it's parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, modulus, addition, and subtraction. And remember, the modulus returns the remainder, not the result of the division. So if you have 5 divided by 2, the answer is 2 remainder 1, and the 1 is what's returned if you're using a modulus calculation. All right, so truth tables with the and, or, and not operators. Make sure you understand those and are very comfortable employing those operators and determining whether the result of a condition is true or false using these operators. Okay, the case and switch statement were introduced with our decision structures with our if then and if then else conditions in the beginning part of the course. So be able to define what is a case or a switch statement and when should such a thing be used. And then make sure that you're able to code an example of it, come up with an example like when would be a good idea as to when you would want to use that, and be able to do that both in pseudocode and in JavaScript. Okay. Functions, these were introduced recently, and a function is very similar to a module, right? The key difference between the two is that a function returns a value and a module does not. But when you're writing functions, one of the tools that you can use to assist you is an IPO chart. You want to make sure that you know what an IPO chart is. What do those initials stand for? The I, the P, and the O. So each one of those is a column in the chart. So what is each one of those? And how are they used? Like, how can we use that chart to create a function? We, during the course of our discussion of functions, we talked about some built-in items, our built-in functions that are available usually as part of libraries of a language. So there's the toUpper string function and the toLower string function that we specifically talked about. What is the purpose of each of those and how do they work? So if I give you a string, how is it going to convert it to lowercase, right? And what happens if I've got numbers in that string? What happens if I have special characters in the string? What happens if I have already lowercase in the string? What happens to that particular item? Same with the toUpper. And you want to make sure that you're able to give an example of what would occur or how you would go about using both of these functions. And then here's writing a function yourself. So this is some practice code. So if we want you to write a function that computes the average of two numbers. It's going to accept two arguments passed to this function. The first argument is going to be called num1, and the second argument is going to be called num2. We want the function to return the computed average, and I want you to write this in pseudocode, and then I want you to write it in JavaScript. So what would that look like? And I would even prompt you, what would it look like to call this function? Because the call, well, it needs to follow a certain format, is not exactly the same as the writing of the function, right? So how do those two differ? All right, loops. So back in week 6 through 10, we talked about loops, and there were three types of loops. Three different loops that we discussed, which are your while, your do while, and your for loop. Okay, now in those loops, we talked about pre-test and post-test loops. So your while and your for loops are pre-test, where they check the condition before executing the loop. And your do while is a post-test, where it executes the loop once and then it checks the condition. We also talked about a condition-controlled loop, which is your while and your do while loops. And we talked about a count-controlled loop, which is your for loop. So you want to make sure that you understand all those different things, you know, pre-test, post-test, condition-controlled, count-controlled. How does all of that work and which loops fall into which category, okay? And you want to be able to say when each loop should be used. When would I use a while loop versus a for loop? You know, when would I use the while loop versus the do while loop? And you want to be able to give an example of each and give those examples both in pseudocode and in JavaScript. Just recently, we talked about the input validation process, where the user would enter input, and then we would check that input to make that sure that it's valid. And if it is valid, we would just proceed on with executing. But if it's not valid, we would ask the user we would tell the user that their data is not valid and why, and then we would prompt them to re-enter their value, and then we would go up and check it again, and we would continue this process until eventually a valid value was entered. So you need to be able to give a general description of this process, similar to what I just did. You need to be able to give the specific steps, and you need to be able to write it in both pseudocode and JavaScript. And so here's an example. Write a loop to prompt the user to enter a value between 25 and 50, validate the number was entered, and then if it's not valid, reprompt. Okay, so write that in pseudocode and write that in JavaScript. And the last construct that we introduced were the arrays. All right, so what is an array? All arrays have both a low boundary and a high boundary. What is the low boundary and what is the high boundary? What is the advantage to using an array in programming? Why would we want to do that? What advantages does it offer? And then writing in both pseudocode and JavaScript, here's some coding examples. Create an array of 15 elements. Create and populate an array of 10 elements with these specific values, red, blue, yellow, green, orange, etc. What's a two-dimensional array? and write a pseudocode to create a two-dimensional array with 5 rows and 4 columns. And now write a pseudocode to create a two-dimensional array with 3 rows, 3 columns, and populating with these specific values, Joe, Sue, Fred, Sam, and so on. And then different algorithms. How would you go about finding the lowest value in an array? How would you go about finding a highest value in an array? And how would you find a specific value in an array? So you want to make sure that you're able to go through all of these things. All right. Now this is available, as I said, this document is available to be downloaded from the final exam icon, and you're more than welcome. I mean, I would highly recommend that you work through all of these things and try to solve them. And then if you'd like, you can submit it to me as long as you give me 2 to 3 days prior to when you plan on taking the exam. You can send it to me and I will review it and then let you know how you did during the course of the completing the review. All right, so wish you guys all good luck on the exam, and I wish you guys an excellent summer.